A Republican Senate candidate just released a campaign video where he literally can't spell the name of the state he's running in. This isn't just another political gaffe. It's evidence of how the Trump era has systematically dumbed down American political discourse. When basic literacy becomes optional for major candidates, we've reached a new low in democratic standards. There was once a time when simple mistakes could end political careers. Politicians were held to basic standards of competence and knowledge. The Trump era has obliterated those expectations, creating a race to the bottom where ignorance becomes a badge of honor rather than disqualification. To understand how far we've fallen, let's remember the political gaffes that once defined career-ending incompetence. Dan Quayle, former Indiana senator and vice president under George H.W. Bush, became the gold standard for political blunders.
A fierce advocate of conservative values of the family and the flag.
Never did a hitch because his daddy's rich. He was comfy and cozy at night.
He developed a speech impediment. He made mistakes. Quayle on the Holocaust.
It was an obscene period in our nation's history. No, not our nation's, but in World War II. I mean, we all lived in this century. I didn't live in this century, but in this century's history.
Even his wife was cautious about exposing him to the media.
I'd be glad. I'd be glad to. I'd be right this way, sir.
Eventually, he was on his own.
I have as much experience in the Congress as Jack Kennedy did when he sought the presidency.
Senator, I served with Jack Kennedy. I knew Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was a friend of mine. Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy.
Quayle's blunders were legendary, including his infamous battle with fictional television characters.
Doesn't help matters when primetime TV has Murphy Brown, a character who supposedly epitomizes today's intelligent, highly paid professional woman, mocking the importance of fathers by bearing a child alone and calling it just another lifestyle choice.
These mistakes were considered career-damaging because they revealed fundamental gaps in knowledge and judgment. Quayle's most famous error, misspelling potato, became a national joke that undermined the entire Bush administration's credibility on education policy. The contrast with today's standards is stark. What once ended careers now barely registers as newsworthy in the Trump era. Basic competence has become optional, creating space for even more spectacular displays of ignorance. Enter Mike Collins, the Republican running against Senator Jon Ossoff in Georgia, who just provided the perfect example of how low standards have fallen. His new campaign video contains an error so basic it would have been unthinkable in previous eras.
This place is broken. Out-of-touch Democrats, like our two U.S. senators, will fight harder for MS-13 gang members than they will nursing students at UGA. No, we've got to be absolutely unrelenting. We've got to be unafraid to fight. We've got to be unafraid to call balls and strikes, a spade to spade. And I think y'all seen, I don't mind doing that.
Mike Collins, great job you're doing.
Okay, we're gonna put the hammer down and we're gonna get it done.
The error might not be immediately obvious, but it's devastating upon closer inspection.
This place is broken. Out-of-touch Democrats, like our two U.S. senators, will fight harder for MS-13 gang members than they will nursing students at UGA. No, we've got to be absolutely unrelenting. We've got to be unafraid to fight. We've got to be unafraid to call balls and strikes, a spade to spade. And I think y'all seen, I don't mind doing that.
Mike Collins, great job you're doing.
Okay, we're gonna put the hammer down and we're gonna get it done.
Collins's campaign apparently doesn't know how to spell the actual name of the state where he's running for office. This isn't a minor typo or slip of the tongue. It's a fundamental failure to master basic information about the constituency he seeks to represent. The error reveals how completely the Trump era has eroded basic competency standards. In previous decades, such a mistake would have immediately disqualified a candidate and become a national punchline. Today, it barely registers as unusual in a political environment where ignorance has been normalized. The contrast with his opponent is telling. Jon Ossoff can correctly spell Georgia among other basic qualifications for representing the state. This fundamental competency difference should matter to voters who expect their representatives to master elementary knowledge about their jurisdiction. Collins' spelling error isn't just individual incompetence. It's symptomatic of how the Trump era has systematically lowered standards for political participation. When basic literacy becomes optional for major candidates, the entire democratic process suffers. The Georgia context makes this particularly significant. This isn't a reliably red state where any Republican automatically wins. Ossoff's previous victory demonstrated that Georgia voters will reject inadequate candidates, especially when Trump's interference actually helps Democratic opponents. The spelling error represents everything wrong with modern Republican politics: contempt for expertise, dismissal of basic competency requirements, and assumption that partisan loyalty trumps fundamental qualifications. This approach may have worked in the Trump era, but it's proving increasingly toxic for down-ballot candidates. The normalization of such basic incompetence has profound implications for democratic governance. When voters accept candidates who can't spell their own state's name, they're accepting representatives who lack the fundamental skills necessary for effective governance. Collins' error symbolizes the broader Trumpification of American politics, where ignorance becomes a virtue and expertise becomes suspect. This race to the bottom doesn't just damage individual campaigns, it undermines the entire democratic process by lowering standards for public service. The economic implications are equally troubling. States and districts represented by fundamentally incompetent officials struggle to attract investment, implement effective policies, or compete in the global economy. When basic literacy becomes optional for elected officials, economic competitiveness suffers accordingly. Mike Collins' inability to spell Georgia represents more than campaign incompetence. It's evidence of how the Trump era has systematically destroyed standards for democratic participation. When candidates can't master basic information about their own states, we've reached a crisis point in American political culture. The contrast with previous eras is stark. Dan Quayle's potato era ended careers and became a national symbol of incompetence. Collins' spelling error barely registers as unusual in today's political environment, revealing how completely standards have collapsed. For Georgia voters, this represents a clear choice between competence and incompetence, between representation by someone who can spell the state's name and someone who apparently cannot. The implications extend far beyond spelling to fundamental questions about qualification for public service. The broader lesson is that democracy requires minimum competency standards that the Trump era has systematically eroded. When basic literacy becomes optional for major candidates, the entire system suffers as unqualified individuals seek positions requiring complex decision-making skills. Collins' campaign error demonstrates that the race to the bottom has consequences. While Trump normalized incompetence at the presidential level, down-ballot candidates are discovering that local voters still expect basic qualifications from their representatives. The question for American democracy is whether we'll continue accepting representatives who lack fundamental competencies, or whether we'll restore standards that ensure elected officials can master basic information about their jurisdictions. Collins' spelling error provides a perfect test case for these competing visions of democratic standards. The economic and governance implications are clear. States represented by incompetent officials struggle to compete and govern effectively. When candidates can't spell their own state's name, voters should question whether they possess the skills necessary for complex policymaking and representation. What's your reaction to a Senate candidate who can't spell the name of his own state in his campaign video? Do you think this kind of basic incompetence should disqualify someone for major office? Or has the Trump era made such errors irrelevant to voters? And how do you think this compares to the political gaffes of previous eras that actually ended careers? Share your thoughts on whether American politics has permanently lowered its standards or if voters will still reject fundamentally unqualified candidates. This is exactly the kind of political accountability that matters when basic competency becomes optional in American democracy. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our coverage of how political standards have evolved or devolved in the modern era. Your engagement helps us continue tracking the gap between what we expect from our representatives and what we're actually getting.